Hello and welcome to the, what day is it now? Thursday? Live stream from the Permaculture Podcast on this beautiful day on the 24th of March 2022. I'm here today to share with you some thoughts that I have on what we can do to learn various skills, many of which we might think of or consider as lost in the world that we live in today. And with that, I will be taking you through some of the ways that I learned a lot of these skills over the years, the books that I've referred to. I'll show you some examples of what my children and I have created over the years. And of course, throughout, we'll have time to take any questions that you may have. As we get started, of course, if you're watching this live or catching it in a replay, make sure to like and subscribe this video. It helps the algorithm for people to find the show. And of course, if you have any questions after this broadcast or you would ever like to get in touch, you can do so by dropping me an email, show@thepermaculturepodcast.com. You can also give me a call, send me a text, or find me on WhatsApp at the show's number, 717-827-6266. With WhatsApp, grab that +1. And of course, if you'd like to join the podcast community, you can find me at patreon.com/permaculturepodcast, where I post monthly AMAs, weekly updates, and other information about what's going on behind the scenes of the podcast, like what's currently happening with the show and the website as I work on getting all of that repaired and roll out a new show. So then, for the conversation today, I have been interested in what might be known as primitive skills or bushcrafting skills for a long time in my life, and learned them when I was a scout. I spent a number of years in the scouting organization, both as a Cub Scout and as a Boy Scout. Went to a high adventure base and got to know a member of our local community who was really big on forageable plants. And he knew something like 300 useful plants in the mid-Atlantic. I grew up in Western Maryland, that wee tiny little section, if you look at Maryland on a map, between Pennsylvania and West Virginia, right in the middle is where I grew up. And my understanding is that that fellow knew, like 300 useful plants in just that area. And so I was fortunate enough not only to learn from him, but also one of my scoutmasters was someone who had done a lot of foraging and a lot of game taking to keep food on his family's table. Oh, hello, Corinne. Glad you could join me today. I don't know that today will be a particularly long live stream, but I'm glad to have you here with me. So, from those experiences, I was interested in these things, and eventually I picked up a copy of Richard Graves' Bushcraft. Sometime, I want to say I was in like 4th or 5th grade. I found this at a library sale or a yard sale or something like that. And this was the book that really got me hooked. And in it is information on ways that you can, it's labeled as a wilderness survival guide, but there's all kinds of information on how to build shelters and how to create cordage and use various tools around us. And I like a skills-based approach to any of our practices rather than necessarily a needing specific tools, because of the way that allows us to create solutions on the fly. If we don't have one particular thing, by being very skills focused, we can bring something into our lives or create something that we need, which I'll show you some examples of here after a bit, that we can then make use of. From there, this was the main book that I went back to over and over and over again through the years. You can pick up copies of it inexpensively used. And I was looking for my copy before sitting down today as I kind of glance over my monitor at my bookshelves, and I couldn't find it, but I swear that it is still in one of those like brown paper bag covers that I created for it, and I just scrawled on it in my printing Bushcraft across the front. But yeah, this was the book that I kept coming back to, and readily available, lots of them out there. I haven't gone through to know how accurate necessarily all of the information in it is, but I always found it useful. As I got older and went to college, I was really interested in archaeology, as many fans of Indiana Jones were. And though I was not in a place to be an archaeologist professionally, I studied it at length while I was at university and had the opportunity to do some experimental archaeology. There was an archaeology fair that my university had every year, and there were some Flint knappers and other folks who were invited in. And that's where I first learned how to turn, flint and obsidian and glass into useful tools. And as a follow-up to that, years later, I came back around to this idea of lost skills and primitive skills and looked at the work of some experimental archaeologists, and that's when I found both the Primitive Technology, a book of earth skills, and then Primitive Technology 2, Ancestral Skills. And these are two books that I picked up and have read quite a bit as well as an adult, and they deepened the knowledge that I had learned in Richard Graves' Bushcraft and expanded on what I had learned there in order to continue to deepen that knowledge. And through it, learn more about, once I have cordage, what can I do with it? What about making baskets? If I have something like willow, not only is the willow itself something that is pliable and bendable that we can turn into useful products, but we can also strip that bark off and weave baskets. And I went looking through some of my pictures today trying to find it, but I used to make little baskets for my children to put rocks in when we would go walking along the stream. And those are the kinds of skills that I learned through these kinds of books. Another series of books that I really recommend for anybody who's interested, and these are the books that I'm going to recommend today, the 7 titles, are really just places to start. If you pick these up, read them, and enjoy them, then I would recommend going and using search terms for primitive skills, ancestral skills, or bushcraft, and you can find a lot more books like that out there. There are also reenactment groups that you might be interested in reaching out to. When I was a kid, they were rendezvous, and so that was like the Mountain Man era post, like 1717, post 1776, pre-Civil War, like in the United States. As I recall from one of my friends who did that kind of reenactment, and there was a lot of like skill trading and learning at those kinds of events. I was also a member of the Society for Creative Anachronism for a while, which was a neat organization to be a part of and learn a lot about fabrics and hand stitching and ornamentation. So in addition to like the books that I share today, there are a lot of groups that are also doing this kind of work still very actively in the world. And the last set of books that I want to recommend for anybody who's interested is the series, The Traditional Bowyer's Bible. Here pictured is the cover of Volume 1, but there are 4 of those. And I think that they cover an encyclopedic amount of knowledge using various articles to share information about making bows and everything associated with them. And very useful for like learning how to use that tension that's in a limb, how to create the cordage that you would use for your bowstring, and then the way that relates back to our lives. By having the skills-based approach, we can apply these ideas to what we do. And that's where I'll show you some of what I've done with this over the years in my own life. One thing that my children and I used to do is we'd make a lot of our own bows. Here are 3 that we would shoot together regularly that we made. The two on the outside are made from wood, some thick willow branches that we were able to harvest. They had maybe about a 15-pound draw when at 28, 30 inches. But just enough that, as you can see here, my children could easily shoot them. The one in the middle is one that we made with some Schedule 80 PVC pipe. And there's a huge collection of folks who are making some cool YouTube videos about making bows in your own backyard, like a whole backyard bowyer movement using things like PVC. And we did it as simply here as just using the round pipe, cutting some notches in it and running some cord between them. And that was enough to put them under tension, and we could shoot arrows with them. And that PVC by itself was heavier than the two wooden ones, but not by much, only by a few pounds. But some of those folks who are in the backyard bowyer hobby have done all kinds of interesting things, like using a heat gun to heat the PVC in order to flatten it, flatten the limbs above and below where you would hold it. There are ways that you can take like fiberglass marker rods, like if you see them, the ones that usually have like little flags on them or stand up from a fire hydrant or something alongside the road. You can get those kinds of markers at your local DIY shop. And by creating a bundle of those, you can slip them down inside the PVC and actually get a bow with a strong enough draw that it will meet hunting requirements in some states. As I recall, Pennsylvania requires like a 40-pound draw on a bow in order to hunt with it. And you can do that with PVC and some fiberglass rods. But then, if you would like to take it much further and dive in deeper, the Traditional Bowyer's Bible series can take you all the way through making all kinds of different bows and from that tools. And as I say, there's a picture of my children from one of our times where we were shooting. That was taken, my son there, who's in the background, will be turning 13 and is now 6'1". I think he was around 8 or 9 when this picture was originally taken. From that work with experimental archaeology and the reading that I'd done over the years, one of the things that I also created were my own set of flint knapping tools, which I've really enjoyed as a way to turn the waste and detritus of civilization into something useful. In addition to doing some knapping with obsidian and flint early on, working with some of those archaeologists when I was in university back, now 22 years ago, showing my age, back when I was 20 or so, learning from them. And many of their tools were like the antler points at the bottom, all natural materials, but by looking around for suggestions on how to create these tools using modern equipment, what I have here from top to bottom is a file handle, which I didn't need, and had a nice copper ferrule around it, which I then used as a striking surface to get myself started and just learn some of the basics. Beneath that is my bopper, which is a long piece of hardwood dowel that I then took a 1.5 inch wide copper end cap and then hammered it around a ball peen hammer that I had to kind of round it out. And then I took some wheel weights and a torch, a brazing torch with some map gas, and then just set the copper cap into a what is it? I forget the name of it at the moment for the tool, but my bench vise. So I put it in at the edge of my bench vise, put the wheel weights in it, hit it with the map gas torch until the wheel weights melted down, let that cool, let it melt down, added some more, melted it down again until that bopper now weighs several ounces on that end, and then carved a neck on the dowel, and then used some 2-part epoxy to mount that bopper there. And actually I've got, I used that picture because it's an easier reference, but I actually have my tools behind me. I keep my flint knapping tools at hand because they're probably my most important toolkit, because short of needing to recreate civilization, I can do a whole lot with that. But yeah, then there's that bopper that's in the middle. Nice, heavy, real good at breaking glass, which is largely what I've made a lot of my arrowheads and spear points and things out of, as I would get heavy bottomed glass bottles. Liquor bottles were really popular. I've got some things that I'm saving for when I'm in a place to shatter some glass and make some new things. But yeah, this was just something I made in my garage after looking around, and I think I'm of a feeling that if I can do this kind of stuff, anybody can. I really recommend it. It's a lot of fun. Then I've got 2 of my flakers, which are the ones underneath the bopper in that picture. Let me see if we can get a better... Nope, I don't think it really wants to focus on me, but these are just 2 pieces of heavy gauge copper wire that I clipped off and mounted in dowel rods, and drilled some holes, put them in, gave them a bit of a point, and then whenever I need to, I can put my thumb over this edge that I rounded off, and then be able to push then against glass in order to flake it and refine the shape. This takes out some bigger chips with this piece of probably, what is that, 1/4 or 3/8 inch copper wire. Yeah, it's 1/4. And then I have this really fine piece of wire on here for taking out even smaller flakes. And this is a toolkit that I built and started with when I first started my own flint knapping kit. And then, though I've hunted over the years, I am not a large game hunter. I've been a small game hunter, so I didn't have antler points. But at a flea market one time is where I found my antler points and added those to my kit. But I'd used these man-made tools for a long time that I just put together in my garage from some different pieces. So yeah, and I went looking. Oh, the other pieces that are essential for my flint knapping kit, or just I guess my knapping kit, is I do have a big piece. I have this smaller piece of leather that I will hold in my hand. So then, if I'm going to be working on a piece, my cell phone's a little big, but then I can hold it in here as I hit the edges or something like that, in order to break it off, or in order to get a good grip before pressing off a flake. And then the wrap that everything goes in is another piece of leather that I keep on my lap to keep sharp shards off of my body. But yeah, and what I really like, as I say, about these skills is just, if I ever need a sharp edge or implement, I have a set of tools that I can use glass in order to break apart and turn into something. I have made sharp edges with porcelain from like toilets, the bottom of broken glasses, and mugs, just about anything that has a considerable amount of surface to it that I can work. I can create a tool anywhere with something like this. Even though I've talked before about like making sure we have certain things with us when we're traveling because they make things easier, such as a knife or a flashlight. You know, I go back to these kinds of gear, those knapping tools, and yeah, there's just a ton of stuff I can create. And now you've caught me as I've kind of been in my passion about knapping and sharing those tools, just because there's so much you can do with it. And I think of the times of having created edges and stripped bark off of willow with it, and then been able to turn that into a little basket and to hold some things. But from there, here are some other tools that I've created over the years based on what I learned from these various books and meeting with folks like Nathan Carlos Rupley and having conversations with him. On the top is a berry hook, which is a forked limb that was then cut off so that I have that short hook. And then that allows me, if I'm out and want to pull down a limb for a tree, it's the handle on that extends like another foot or so past in that picture. So the berry hook is something like, I think 5 feet long with that crotch at the top and that little hook. But then that allows me, then I can reach up and grab a tree branch and pull it down if I want to harvest fruit. It's long enough that depending on what I'm working on, that I can jam the end of that hook into the ground so that whatever I've pulled down is at chest height. I also like berry hooks because you can, if you're going into brambles, you can reach in with that. You can reach in with that hook, past what you want to harvest, turn, pull it back, and pull out like a blackberry cane that has fruit on it that you might not be able to get to because of the way that the stand has grown up. Or if you want to separate out branches like on a blueberry bush. Berry hooks are just super useful tools to have. Beneath it are my digging sticks. The smaller one was my son's when he was little. The larger one was my own. And I try, whenever working with a digging stick, I like to make something that's a little bit higher, a little bit longer than waist high, so that if I want to, I can grab it up top and then be able to dig with it and get into the ground without going to the ground to at least start something. But then they're also really useful because you can do, a split grip on them if you get on your knees and really dig into the ground. And for just being sticks that were chosen for their size to match ourselves, my son and I have dug some pretty crazy and impressive holes over the years with our digging sticks. I have planted a garden one year with nothing but one of my digging sticks, just to have that experience, and they're super useful. As much as I love my hoe and other things and would not get rid of them if I were working large pieces of land, it's just a reminder that there are lots of places that we can start when we are building out a garden or digging in a food forest, and there are ways that we can do it without needing necessarily the latest or greatest or biggest piece of equipment or most expensive thing out there. There's all kinds of ways to achieve this, but I don't know that I would have thought this way or tried this or experimented with these kinds of tools had it not been for encountering Richard Graves' Bushcraft all those years ago and continually coming back to this kind of work. And it's why, if you haven't done it, I would recommend picking up a book like that and at least exploring it yourself or with your family. Especially if you have children, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do, lots of neat plants you can harvest and experiment with. As I say, my son had his own digging stick, and something else, like from the skills that I learned in those books, this is a toy that I made my son when he was 4 or 5, using a piece of willow from my yard, some twine that I had, and then crafting a broken piece of like 1/4-inch plywood into a toy axe for him. And all of that came from this knowledge, this knowledge and skills that I had developed through these bushcraft books. And even more practically, though, I also used what I learned in those books for fixing the problems of civilization. And this is a picture of our recycling bin that I laced back together with some cord. drilled some holes through it, ran the cord through it, and it held it together. And I think this thing got broken like 2 years into having it, but by lacing it together this way, it still allowed the pieces of plastic to move when they would hit, while still holding them in place so that I could grab it and pick it up with one hand and move it around, fill it and take it to the curb. And last I checked, this recycling bin is still in service like 7 years after I laced it back together. And again, without having experienced these bushcraft books and thought about how to apply that information to the world that I live in now, I probably would have just put that out for recycling and called up the township and said, hey, I need another recycling bin. When can you get me one? And that would have been the end of it. But instead, I was able to take something and apply those ideas of permaculture, that it's not just about reduce, reuse, recycle, but also about refusing to create waste. And I find these kinds of skills super helpful for that. Even if it's making sure that the berries on the bushes don't go to waste. Or in cases like this, finding alternative ways to repair something that I wouldn't have known about otherwise. And if I remember right, I believe Richard Graves' book is written for North America. So are the other other than the Bowyer's Bible, the other books that I recommended, such as the Primitive Technology 1 and 2, they're written for the United States and audiences here. If you're not in this area and you would like to learn these kinds of skills in your native language, look for Bushcraft books. Check your library for something like that, primitive skills, and you'll likely find something like these that will be helpful for you in the places where you live. Because a lot of those books will talk about like what can you harvest for cordage, which will be dependent on where you are. Like where I am, milkweed and dogbane are two incredible plants to harvest fiber from and turn into cordage, and I love those. Also check to see, in addition to some of the organizations that I talked about earlier, like folks who are doing mountain man type reenactment with rendezvous, or like the Society of Creative Anachronism that are teaching a lot of these lost skills, look for meetup groups that are doing like bushcrafting, fire making, foraging. If you get to know those kinds of folks, a lot of these skills and circles, they overlap quite a bit. I won't say that their Venn diagram is a circle, but sometimes it's pretty close. And so once you get to know some of the foragers, they can teach you the folks who are doing shelter building, or maybe the shelter building folks will teach you introduce you to the people who are doing fire, who will introduce you to the people who are doing skill building or tool making, and it's this joyous circle. And I really am looking forward to when my wife and I are on the land again, that I can plant some of these plants in the appropriate biome that I've used regularly for this kind of creation, so that then I can begin teaching these kinds of classes and workshops in person and be recording videos to share with you that pull from this background and show you what's it like to strip the bark off of willow. How do you choose a good digging stick? Making sure the length is right for yourself and how to measure it and things like that. I really miss it. But yeah, we're hoping that we'll land in Pittsburgh sooner rather than later, which will provide the opportunity to purchase a house and have a little bit of land and start building some of this out. So yeah, there's my overview of some books, organizations, people, and groups to look for in order to develop some of these lost skills. From here, there is no live stream next week as I am on the road to North Carolina, and I wish I'd taken a picture. Right now, my dining room table, which seats 8, is currently covered with recording equipment that I'll be taking with me to record some interviews with Drew and Lacey of the Schoolhouse Life. On Monday, March 28th, I'll be arriving at their site on Sunday the 27th, staying till Tuesday. We'll be recording a bunch of video and having all kinds of conversations. Then I head to Western North Carolina, Asheville, and we'll spend Tuesday night at Earth Haven getting a tour for the upcoming retreat that we're going to be having there, which if you're interested in that retreat, that will be a 24-hour introduction to permaculture, and you can find out more information at learnfromtravel.com/permaculture. Should be the URL for that. If not, drop me a line. While I'm there, I'll be at Wild Abundance meeting with Natalie Bogwalker on Wednesday. We'll be recording some video interviews together. And then I'm going to be meeting up with some listeners and touring some sites in Asheville on Thursday, heading by the Peace Gardens and some others. Going to take as many pictures and as much video as I can while I'm there, at least until I run out of batteries or storage space. If I do, I may wind up stopping somewhere to grab another memory card just to keep rolling. And then I'll be sharing that with everybody in the weeks ahead. On the YouTube channel, on Patreon, Instagram, owned by Facebook. I'll be posting pictures to Instagram, and Twitter as well. Twitter, you can find me at Permaculture Pod. Instagram is Permaculture Podcast. I haven't posted there in a while, but I'll be getting back to it. Then when I get back on Friday, April 1st, take the weekend off. Back the following week on a kind of a follow-up to this conversation about skill developing by sharing a bunch of books that I have in my library and would recommend some activities that my wife and I engage in order to keep our knowledge of plants current and to always be looking for useful plants. And share some of those insights and thoughts. And then after that live stream, I'm digging in pretty deep with my web developer in order to get the podcast back up and running so episodes can be downloaded and I can start posting some new episodes. That will probably take the rest of that first full week of April. We are hoping to have podcasts available again by Friday, March 8th. And after that, I will start releasing new podcasts. The podcast being up and available again, though, will not be the same as the website getting back up. That's still going to take a few weeks after that. But we believe we found a solution to get the show back into people's ears relatively quickly. Quicker than we were originally expecting. And so, if there's anything there you haven't listened to, you'll be able to go back and check that out. And then, I'm expecting to be releasing new episodes of the show by the end of April, as well as some of the videos from the trip to North Carolina and things like that. If you're still with me and have any questions you'd like to drop into the chat, go ahead and do so now before we draw this to a close. Otherwise, as I start these videos with, if you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email, show@thepermaculturepodcast.com. You can also call or text or WhatsApp me directly at 717-827-6266. Of the two, texting and WhatsApp will get you the quicker response. I do respond to calls twice a week, usually either Mondays and Thursdays or Tuesdays and Fridays, depending on the week. But text and WhatsApp I get to whenever I can. And then, of course, if you would like to join the podcast community, you can do so at patreon.com/permaculturepodcast. I'm on there usually 2 or 3 times a week checking messages, post an update more or less every week, AMAs once a month, any time that there's a live stream like this that goes up on Patreon so patrons get a heads up before it happens. So but thank you everybody for this midweek live stream. As a reminder, that next live stream on Tuesday, April 5th about foraging will be at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. I'm expecting there's a good bit for me to cover, so that should run the entire hour. But until the next time, as I always end the show and like to end these conversations, until the next time, spend each day learning the skills you need to live the life you love while taking care of Earth, yourself, and each other.